Thank you. And there was a lot of thinking and decision behind me being here. I think we had hoped for something else, but we were basing it on slides that we could get that were available, and I happened to have my laptop and scrambled to put some slides together. They're still pretty wonky, but I also wanted to say that presentation by David Farmer was absolutely fantastic, and yeah, and really makes me think about how this CASETA has just been getting better and better, and I think this year has been the best ever up until now. I'm going back to old style CASETA in just a moment. But since my shtick these last couple of days has been part stand-up comic, I will tell you that I had the great pleasure of going to the Galapagos last summer. My mother-in-law is Ecuadorian, and her dream was to take her sons and grandkids, which I got to go along because I bore 2 of her grandchildren, to the Galapagos. And because she's Ecuadorian, she got a really amazing tour guide for us named Rafael. And every island we were on, everywhere we were, Rafael would be there on his bicycle. And we'd have to take taxis because we had about 9 people. Rafael, completely handsome Cuban guy who's been doing tours on the Galapagos for a long time, he would zoom ahead of us, ahead of the taxi on the bicycle, and beat us to every location when we would see the turtles, when we would go to the restaurants. And in the morning at 6 a.m., he was at the hotel waiting for us, just smiling. And I knew he'd been out all night partying. And then he kept taking us to the same restaurant every night for dinner. And we were kind of joking about it, and he would always be there first on his bicycle, and we'd trundle in. Food was fantastic, but it was kind of funny that we would go to the same restaurant every night. And then he told us that on the last night, he would introduce us to the chef. You know where this is going. On the last night, Rafael steps out of the kitchen. So that's kind of what I feel like today. I will be your Rafael for the next few minutes. So the thinking, truly was, what did I have on my laptop, and what could I have access to, and what did I know about? And so I will talk mostly about the Umlauf, and then I wanted to give you some information on our current exhibition because it's getting quite a bit of attention. I am the curator at the Umlauf Sculpture Garden and Museum in Austin, Texas. And Umlauf was a small part of my book, but he was not a major part because he's not that abstract. His abstractions aren't that great, and he tends to be very traditional. But I wanted to give you a little bit of an introduction to what we have at the Umlauf, if you haven't been there, and encourage you to go and hopefully show you things you didn't know about, even if you have been there. So Charles Zumloff is from Chicago, born in South Haven, Michigan, with a last name like Umlauf, underwent and experienced a lot of anti-German sentiment around World War I and into World War II, actually, but especially World War I. And they found that South Haven, Michigan, the family had 8 children, a German father, a Swiss-French mother. And so they moved to Chicago when he was very young. He showed an aptitude for sculpting when he was 5 years old. The story is on the banks of Lake Michigan. But he ended up studying at the Chicago Art Institute even when he was 11. It was a very, very poor family. Father was an alcoholic. Both his parents had passed on by the time he was 18. But he started working at the Art Institute. In fact, one of his sisters and one of his brothers were also really remarkable artists. In 1937, he married Angeline Allen, who he met at the Chicago Art Institute. She ends up like so many women, fortunately not the Texas women printmakers, and the women of a lot of the women from David's presentation. But Angie ends up giving up her artistic career and writing poetry to support Charles. And we're very glad that she did because we have such wonderful archives now. But it's a double-edged sword. He moves to the University of Texas at Austin in 1941. I'll tell you a little bit more about that. But the art department at the University of Texas at Austin had just gotten going in 37, 38. He was the first professor of life drawing and sculpture there. Connie Forsyth ends up being the first woman professor there. Interesting stories about that. He stays there for 40 years and retires as professor emeritus in 1981. 1985, he is thinking of how to make a legacy for himself because like a lot of sculptors, he had a very high estimation of who he should be and what he wanted to have his legacy be. So he donated in 1985 to the city of Austin 168 sculptures that ended up being 273 objects, plus his home and studio. And then the Umlauf Sculpture Garden did not exist at that time. It was some quick moves were made to establish it on some adjacent property. So what we have today is the adjacent property where the Umlauf is, but what was actually given to the city of Austin was the studio and home. So this is Chewy's, this is Barton Springs, this is Barton Springs Road, and then Barton Springs is over here. This is Robert E. Lee Road. They're still calling it Robert E. Lee Road. So this is what they actually gifted to the city, and this is where you can visit today on another about 6 acres. He died in 1994, but not, he actually placed a lot of the sculptures at the garden himself, physically, still lifted them up and put him in position. Angie didn't die until until she was 97, about 2012 in June. And I think that really shocked the city of Austin because suddenly they realized they had all of this property to take care of and things couldn't keep going on the way they had been. And so that's kind of what precipitated them to hire an executive director. We've got Nina Seeley. And then a year later, they decided they needed a curator finally, and that's how I was very happy to arrive there. So this photograph is from a session that Life magazine took. He was in Life magazine, as were many of the Texas artists, and they actually did 2 photo sessions with him individually. This one was never published, but it's a great photograph of him working from 1950. So that's the Umlauf, and a little bit more, this is the studio that we own, that we will eventually, it is not open to the public, but that we will open to the public eventually. Very humble. I think humility is what constitutes the Umlauf home and studio. And there's the interior of the studio. Another slightly better shot with that's a Prometheus, study for Prometheus figure right there. And a number of early pieces. Wonderful drafting table. Some plans, where we might eventually go. It's going to be a long time. And then here is from the inside looking back at night of our Lawrence Speck design building. This is Umlauf. We rent out for a lot of weddings, so we have a lot of these really glossy photos. But this is Umlauf's Pietà in this kind of raking yellow light. It's bronze, 1945 Pietà. I'll show that to you in a minute. And over here is his War Mother. And these are both on the axis. You come through this door, this entryway, and I'll show that to you in a minute. And these are 2 of the first sculptures that you see. Another wedding shot. And then there's the exterior. So this is an older photograph I found on the internet. But this is the very subdued modernist entry to the Lawrence Speck building. And I rather like it because it's very quiet, and then you go in and you see this beautiful garden. Then you'll see Pietà, and War Mother is actually right in front of you. And Lawrence Speck ended up getting 2 architecture awards for this design. So War Mother was the first piece. This is the piece that got him his job at the University of Texas. It's in cast stone, which is a cheap alternative to marble, and it is concrete. This was made in response to the Nazis' invasion of Poland. Umlauf always felt, he would always represent war scenes through the people who experienced them, and often through the women and the children. And he also commented on how the women were the ones who were staying at home. It's very telling, but it, again, like I say, it's on that axis. There's some real downer sculptures on that first axis when you walk through. Maybe we'll change that someday. We have a lot of really gorgeous drawings by him, and we're lucky to have Tom Motley here. Tom Motley got really interested in Umlauf. He's recently retired from Richland University, but a great artist, great writer, fantastic thinker, and traveler and looker, and he came down and gave us a wonderful talk about Umlauf's drawings. Based on this incredible collection of 80-plus sketchbooks that we got after Angie's passing. But I just show this because it's an example of the early drawing that, I think Tom will note first off, is extremely volumetric, preparatory for this kind of sculpture. And this is just an example of the kind of things that we have and that we work into our programming. Even though it's not the same as War Mother, you see some of the similar it's a similar era and some of the similar styles and faces. And there she is from the front. And that's a direct response by Umlauf to Katha Kollwitz, which was something he never talked about, but you can just see it visually. Another German making a lot of wartime works, and I think it's kind of obvious, actually, and I did it a little bit more obviously there. So it's like with all artists, he denies having influences and then you'll find things throughout them. It's just him and Michelangelo, that's it, nobody else. And there's another one of the downers, Refugees 2, 1945, another one of these top three that's when you bring in, and I'm thinking about this for a reason. One of our, somebody who owns a lot of Umlaufs is a guy named Bill Mitchell. He was one of the founders of Texas Instruments, and he has about 30 Umlaufs on an incredible hill country ranch that he still takes care of himself. And he lets us come out and do tours out there of his Umlaufs. But he called me just last week, and he's like, Katie, when are you going to get rid of all those tragedy sculptures? I said, well, eventually we're going to move. He said, I just can't stand walking in and seeing those tragedy sculptures. So this is another one of the tragedies. This is neat. I actually just found this last night, looking for some things. And this is from the Portal of Texas History. Thank you very much. Texas Week, 1946, where you'll see a very young Umlauf with his pietà. And then also you'll see his refugees, which today is in the collection of the Panhandle Plains Historical Museum. And that made it into my book. Thank you, Michael. A really wonderful one of those early tragedy plasters when Umlauf was very engaged with the war. And then that's a nice shot from the video still that the Panhandle Plains has out with that Ruth Euler in the background. So he also, another piece that really helped make his name, he only got to UT in 1941, but is this Pietà, which was shown at the Museum of Fine Arts Houston in cast stone in, in clay in 1945. And it was major for him. He really began to make his mark there. And immediately somebody there offered to cast it in bronze, and Umlauf said, of course I will. So he cast it in bronze and then got in huge trouble with his dealer at the time because that was a big no-no. But this is another one of the tragedies that you see right at the beginning, but it also shows what's so great about Umlauf, which is doing this pietà that doesn't simply have the figure of Christ and the Virgin Mary, but it also has the Mary Magdalene on the back. And I found a drawing. Umlauf does identify that as the Mary Magdalene. Some people have thought it might be Elizabeth, but he thinks it's the Mary Magdalene. And this was, Umlauf always thinks like a sculptor. He always thinks it's very important to get behind things and see them in 3Ds from all directions. And so, of course, he would put a surprise, something that's completely separate from the composition. And yes, Michelangelo does this in one of his sculptural pietas too, but it's different. They're all frontal, and Umlauf puts her in the back and does it in the round. One of the wonderful things that we also have that I found in the Umlauf house is a beautiful study for the head of the Virgin Mary in terracotta. that's just barely fired, not high fired. So just again, showing some of the things that we have for study here. And Marion Kugler McNay was a huge supporter of Umlauf. In fact, she heard about, War Mother was from 1939, and it was first shown in Chicago, and to some great criticism for being overwrought and too emotional and too intense. But she saw it there, and Marion Kugler McNay is actually one of the people who recommended Umlauf for the post at the University of Texas at Austin when they were looking for national art stars. And so she eventually, or pretty soon, commissions from him a crucifixion that she wants to have on her gravestone. And this is what we actually have this sculpture. It's up at the house. It's not visible to the public. But this is what he presents to her. And I brought this up as a wonderful example because spectacular, very 1940s Umlauf sculpture at his most full of pathos and most expressionistic, high cheekbones, very Eastern European features, but it's really a truly broken body of Christ, and it's really disturbing and upsetting. And if you walk around to the back of it, you can do this on his other crucifixions too, but you can feel the spikes coming through the back of the cross. Well, she said, no thank you. And this has happened a number of times. I mean, we all know about this. She said, no, thank you. She said, it's very emotional, but I think it's a bit too strong for the sisters. And she's referring to the sisters at the shrine of St. Anthony de Padua, which is right up the street from the McNay. And she says it's a bit too strong. So he quickly turns around and makes another one. Oh, I should have had that up, but a beautiful image. These are actually photographs from our archives that Angie Umlauf kept for us. So she ends up commissioning this from him. In 1947, 1948, aluminum crucifixion. This is it in situ at the shrine of St. Anthony de Padua, and she actually puts it on Father Bosquet's grave, and Marion Kugler McNay is buried right next to that. So as you can see, it's clearly a far more heroic, noble Christ figure. It's not that broken, upsetting one. And then the McNay also got, that's a version, the McNay ended up giving us one of their scale models, and that's at our garden at night. So that's a scale model. It's about 5 feet tall. Also aluminum, that's kind of a greenish picture of a detail of the one at our garden. There's a scale model that's at the McNay because the full-size crucifix is up the street at St. Anthony de Padua. And then, so I want to go back to this because I was having some fun with this. Umlauf takes the body is more like a thief from Golgotha, from Calvary. Much more the medieval conception of the broken body of Christ. And to me, this is completely intriguing, and I actually want to work on an exhibition on this, because it's sort of the there but for the grace of God go I kind of form. It's also showing that Christ has as much of a relationship to the thieves. And also it shows, of course, his formal influences. And I think it's pretty obvious, but look at how the arms are broken and bent over. And there's also a Hans Memling crucifixion where, of course, Christ here at the center, but look at the two thieves. So this was a completely standard iconography that Umlauf picks up on. And what's interesting is I'm sure that Mrs. McNay, in case you didn't get the point, I put some circles around it. I'm sure that Mrs. McNay wasn't necessarily conscious of this, but she responded strongly to this crucifixion and just said, oh, no, 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 because it has that kind of extreme emotion that you'll see in the early Renaissance and particularly the Northern Renaissance, that then, we begin to get a much more heroic Christ a little bit after that. So I thought that was kind of interesting. Also interesting, this went on to be exhibited in the Whitney Museum. So Umlauf trotted it out there anyhow, and it was reviewed in the New York Times. And then it won the 1950 Texas Annual Prize. And so it's kind of a sort of a happy, ironic story that he ended up being very successful with this crucifixion nonetheless, even though the commission changed. I thought I'd whiz through really quickly. He was at University of Texas, so there's some major sculptures at University of Texas. This is the family, 13 feet tall in front of McCombs Business School. There's the torchbearers, back when they used to look pretty good, in front of Flawn Academic Center. They need conservation. There is a mother and child down by the UT Alumni Center. He was the sculptor for the master plan architects when they redesigned it. And also Harry Ransom was a big Umlauf fan, and so they did a lot of commissions from him all around 1960. This one is late 70s. This came later. His three muses were also commissioned. They were inside Flawn Academic Center, and they from 63 to 83, and then they were moved for the UT Centennial to Centennial Park right across from the Irwin Center on Red River in Austin. And they were moved to make way for this, which is now built, the Dell Medical School. And they were going to go into storage, but this was the first thing that I did when I got there. We talked UT into transferring them, and actually, because they had been vandalized, we argued that we needed to take care of them. They were by the nursing school, and somebody put lipstick and nail polish on them. I don't know if it was the nurses. So UT agreed to let us have them, and we have conserved them, and so it was, made TV news to move them. But we were very happy not to have them go into storage up at J.J. Pickle, which is what they would have done. And so they moved these, strapped them up. You still see her lipstick. It's now gone. And now we have them on long-term loan. And they'll be really expensive to move again. And now they built the Dell Medical School, and they've got some new contemporary art, so I don't really expect they're going to ask for them back. But if they do, they have to pay for it. So Umlauf's most famous sculpture, and I put this in here because it's his most famous, but it's also the final version is at Dallas Love Field, not too far from here. And this was 1959. This is what, he already had a very strong reputation by this time, but this really secured it. When Dallas Love Field was being built, the Monuments Commission put out a request for artwork, and I think they got 11 people submitting full-scale models, in terracotta drawing, and it was all anonymous. And Umlauf ended up winning, and this is the scale model of his successful winning entry, and I'll show it to you. And there's the version that it was installed in late 1960, finally in 1961. So a 22-foot plinth with a 17-foot tall sculpture with 18 birds going around it, and they're supposed to be on clouds, and so the water makes the clouds. And it was a huge commission for him, literally in every sense. He went way over budget. He ended up having to cast in Italy, and that led to him casting in Italy for the next 25 years because it was so much cheaper to do there. And there he is in 1960 in Pietrasanta, Italy, working on Spirit of Flight. And you can see one of his scale models and then the full-scale version. And I wanted to bring this up again, Carl. I happen to have these slides with me, and I was really, really glad that I did. One of the things, I'm going to circle back, but one of the things that we have been doing at the Umlauf recently is trying to show Umlauf with some of his contemporaries, because like I said, he only sees himself alone. Or maybe we would bring in Rodin or Michelangelo sculptures, but we're really trying to show that he wasn't the only thing in town. And also, it's interesting too, because you realize how sternly conservative his sculpture making was. So we did this, probably my favorite show of all time, an exhibition of Charles Umlauf and Charles T. Williams, whose son is in the audience today. And it was a wonderful comparison, and I'm sorry I don't have more images of it, but it was a wonderful comparison of their work. This is Fun with Freud, and when you walked into it, you could see this Umlauf right through the hole in it. And you could see how different they were, and also how lacking in sense of humor Charles Umlauf had, at least sculpturally. Also, what has struck me repeatedly is you get all of these sculptors, well, certainly Charles Williams, Jim Love, Jack Boynton was messing with sculpture all the time. All these people who welded and used scrap metal. Umlauf only saw welding as a way to get to the final product. You know, you would weld the parts of the bronze together to get to the final product. He never wanted to use it as a medium in itself, and he would usually, you know, try to leave it to the craftsman if he could. So exhibitions like this are truly revelatory in what they tell you. And it was a really, really fun exhibition because we had a strong hunch that these two guys did not like each other. And you know, you didn't need any story, you didn't need any evidence, you just looked at the work and you could tell they were polar opposites, and here we were forcing them together in Umlauf's museum. So amazing we got away with it. And this is just a page. I had a page from the catalog on my computer, but you'll see that this is Charles Williams. This was just a clip from a Life magazine from 1957, when the American Federation for the Arts had its huge international conference in Houston and Fort Worth and San Antonio. So this is just a clip from that page, and then there's another one. Well, actually, there's an Umlauf right there, and then there's the Charles Williams, just showing that they had been shown together. And that's just another clip. So there's a Umlauf, Charles T. Williams, Charles T. Williams. This is just the front and back of the brochure that we did. And then one of my favorite things, because I'm so happy to have this, you can go out and see this in Scott Barker's magnificent exhibition that I think is coming down at 2 o'clock today. But you can go see Charles Williams' Continuum. Again, the figure numbers are there because I took this out of the catalog brochure. And then Umlauf's Supplication there. Yes, these are stretched, but don't worry about it. And Tom Motley wrote a really, really terrific, compelling article for Zum Beispiel called Clash of the Titans. Terrific title about the Charles Williams and Charles Umlauf exhibition. So I encourage you to go find that. It's easy to track it down. And this is something from Tom's article that I pulled out. There's a Charles T. Williams and Umlauf's The Kiss. So you can kind of see how different they were. Charles T. Williams working in I-beams and though I guess this isn't powder coated, but painted metal. And it was gorgeous. It really, when we put other things in the garden, it really makes it pop, and really, you see your Umlaufs in a different way, and not necessarily negatively. It almost helps them out to have other work around them. So that was pretty exciting. And this was also something from, this is just straight up Umlauf. St. Michael and Lucifer that Tom writes really eloquently about, and a detail from that that I'm not going to get into now, but that's really nice. And it's neat in terms of Clash of the Titans, that show. But doing research for that, I knew from Carl that Charles had also applied for the Love Field Commission. And I got this on microfilm. I can't remember if you have this or not, Carl, but these are my original pictures from microfilm that I happen to have on my computer. And you can see how different what Charles Williams turned in for. And it was rejected, but you can see completely modernist, totally different kind of aesthetic, and not accepted by the Monuments Commission. In fact, Umlauf won first and second place for two very allegorical, much more traditional sculptures. And then Carl also has his father's journals, and you can see in this sketchbook entry from probably about 1959, July model for Love Field sculpture, wings over 7 seas, 7 wings. He describes it, and then he wrote, took, Charles Umlauf. So he was definitely keeping track of them. And then the weirdest thing is that I found this in Angie's files just by coincidence during the show, and look where it is. Fort Worth Museum dedication issue and of this arts magazine. And inside it, so there's the cover of it, and inside it was a sculpture by Charles Williams called Jean Valjean. And Charles Umlauf, who was not a writer, wrote, "This is an insult to Victor Hugo." So this is the kind of things, we had this strong hunch, and sure enough, and I just feel like Angie Umlauf kind of made that magazine rise to the top and just put it in front of us. Maybe she wanted us to shut the show down, and of course this is such a gorgeous sculpture. Do we know where that is? Is that a sore point? Yeah, keep an eye out for that sculpture. But just how strange is that? Because Umlauf was not a writer. Angie wrote everything. He didn't write treatises. He was too busy sculpting. He wasn't like Harry Bartsch, where you can find his writing. So many people, not Umlauf. And here he is in his own handwriting talking about this insult. And then he kept the magazine, which is even funnier. So that was a really, really great show, and the kind of thing we want to do. But yes, he did cinch that Love Field Commission, which really brought him a lot in the future. And we had a chance, and Carl joined us on this. Love Field recently conserved this. They spent, it seems like $750,000 to redo the whole fountain, conserve this, and this is Michael Van Enter. This is in his Dallas studio. There's Carl, there's Kay, she's actually the director of Dallas Public Art, Kay Callis, amazing woman. So we got to go and watch it be conserved before they put it back up. And I can't tell you how happy I was, because we've had so many people call and tell us that their Umlaufs are coming down and would we like them. And in this case, they said, our Umlauf's coming down for conservation, can you help us? And we said, absolutely. And so we got to go on March 31st and watch it be reinstalled in the new fountain that they built, slightly a little bit distant from where it was originally. And that was a real treat. Tom was there too. There it is, looking glorious. It originally had a black patina on it. It's also kind of interesting because ours is green. Okay, so here's a quick shift. A little bit about Umlauf. I meant to put a blank slide in between there, but I didn't have a chance to. So I'm hoping you recognize this. I appreciate Ken Haferteep talking about one of his subjects looking fat yesterday, because Farrah looks kind of stretched out. She was not fat. So this is the famous Farrah Fawcett poster that probably some of you had on your wall. The best-selling poster of all time. It's probably 15 million copies. Farrah Fawcett was an Umlauf student, and we'd known this for a long time, but we hadn't had a chance to see her work. Well, sadly, she was actually in the running. She wanted to have an Umlauf exhibition, and it was in the works around 2005, 2006. They were just starting to hatch out a checklist of her work, because the Umlauf had long had a tradition of showing his students. But she got cancer, which was the end. She spent years battling cancer, and she finally died in 2009. And so since I had gotten there, I knew that the Blanton Museum got her art collection. And so I toured it a couple of times, and it was kind of messy and hard to see in there. I'll show you just a couple shots. But we ended up opening a show this February of mostly works from Farrah's collection, of work by her while she was in Umlauf's class, work by him that she owned, and then we borrowed liberally from private collections and from our own City of Austin collection. And we have been getting a lot of attention for this, and so we thought, actually, this is not just self-serving. I think it's a really interesting exhibition, and it will be up through August. We decided to leave it up during the summer because we get so many international visitors, people who've never heard of Charles Umlauf, but certainly know who Farrah was. And we got in Art News, the first time that Umlauf's ever been in Art News, and it's a really good article that on my computer, which is up there with the slides, I was going to read to you a little bit of the article, but it's really well written and talks about the melancholic aspect of the show as well. So you can go online and read that. And Neil Farso calls it a surprisingly beguiling and moving exhibition, steeped in a mix of melancholy and resilience. And he really picked up on some of the sorrowful aspects of the show, and I'll try to show you a little bit of that and maybe give you a bit of an insider preview of this exhibition. So the anchor of the show, to me, is this sculpture by Charles. And I'm sorry, I'll have to tell you what all these are because the slides were glitching, and so I had to take everything off and re-enter them without text. But this is a portrait by Charles Umlauf of Farrah Fawcett from 1973 in bronze. And she owned a copy that's in the Blanton collection, and we, City of Austin, own a copy. This is ours. It is the only sculpture he did of her from life. To me, it's very touching because it doesn't look anything like this, and it isn't even really recognizable as Farrah. She's much more classical. It looks like some kind of allegorical muse, in a sense. That's the only one that he did from life. He ended up doing about probably 12 Farrah sculptures of her directly, portraits, and then a few full-bodied sculptures, and then a lot of things that she influenced that aren't necessarily her. She came to the University of Texas in 1965. She started as a microbiology major and a Tri-Delt pledge. She did not make her grades, so she didn't make the Tri-Delts. And then she quickly realized that she was skilled at art and became an art major. And so this is an Umlauf drawing of her that's in a hardbound sketchbook of his, probably right when she got into his class. And he calls her Farrah, F-A-R-A, and then F-E-R-A. Like he's trying to remember, he's not a writer. He's trying to figure out how to spell her name, but that's one of my favorite drawings of her. And then later, I found in his studio a rolled up drawing, two of them, that said Farrah, and this is one of them, and this must have been about 1966 when she was in his class and when she modeled for the class, which was common. You know, the students, if somebody didn't show up, you'd get in front of the class and be the model. Again, I think one of his better drawings and one of his better renderings of her, because he doesn't actually get her face right in the sculptures ever, and I think that's interesting. This is his, you know, he begins to try to capitalize on her. So he does this in the 1977. Farrah with the hair after she, you know, got known for her hair. Again, the features really don't look like her, but it's obviously Farrah, and that's the one that people always ask to come see. We don't always have it on view, but that's the one they always ask to come see, the famous Farrah. And he knew there was a market for these things, and so I don't know how many castings of this there are, but it was fairly well requested, and I know Joe Jamail had a copy of that, as well as Farrah. Farrah was he was giving her some works, but she was buying his work, and we have letters from her asking for particular works. We have Angie sending letters to Farrah and her publicist with a price list, because I think Angie and Farrah were the clash of the titans. You know, Farrah's always trying to get something for free, and Angie's always trying to charge her. But Farrah ended up buying quite a bit. We have some check stubs from Farrah Fawcett and Lee Majors, $6 Million Man, when they were buying some works. So she had a mix, and I think in Farrah Fawcett's collection, she had to have over 25 Umlauf's drawings and sculptures, and I believe that what came to the Blanton wasn't everything. Her longtime boyfriend, Ryan O'Neill, and other people had gone through and already gotten a lot of things before they came to the Blanton, so it's still just a portion of her collection. This is our exhibition, and the black tape is there because everybody wants to go touch it. That's an Umlauf. I want you to remember, an electroplated one, because right behind it is a Farrah Fawcett sculpture, and you can see that she's trying to do exactly what he's doing, and I'll show that to you in a minute. This is by Farrah Fawcett of her sister Diane. There's an Umlauf portrait of Farrah. There's the classic one back there. This is by Farrah. She did 23 versions of this in Hydrastone. She had learned from Umlauf how to paint it to look like stone, which is something he learned at the Art Institute of Chicago. And so she got really good at it. And she would give these away. She would never sell or exhibit, not until much later, until 2001, and that was a completely different project with Keith Edmeyer. So these were all things she gave to her friends. This is the one, this is by Farrah Fawcett, and it is a torso that I wanted to compare to this one because you can see she's copying Umlauf. She's taking exactly his composition for this, but she has a very different finish on the arms. Umlauf has a different closure of the arms, and she also has bigger breasts, which I think is interesting, than Umlauf's. But you can see what a good and astute student she was and how attentive she was. And again, she made multiple copies that are slightly different versions of this. This is by Umlauf of Farrah Fawcett in our collection. There's both of those torsos together. This is Farrah Fawcett's portrait in bronze of her sister Diane, her only sister, and this is one of the ways that there's a lot of sadness to this exhibition. Not only did Farrah die at 62, her sister Diane, who was 10 years older, also died of cancer at 62. But Farrah had done a really, really glorious portrait of her sister Diane. I'll get back to that in a minute. I just want to point out, when Farrah had a baby at age 38 with Ryan O'Neill, her son is named Redmond, she went right to Umlauf and asked him to do a series of portraits. And so we actually have 3 sculpted portraits of Redmond. I think there were many more that probably are with Redmond O'Neill now. But we have 3 of Umlauf's portraits of Farrah's son that she paid for in the exhibition there in the Blanton collection. And this is a portrait by Farrah while she was in Umlauf's class in 1967, and she signs it very proudly right here on the button. And that was her nephew, Jeff, her sister's only son at the time. And so she did a picture of that probably for class. It's very yellowed. It's on acidic paper, but it's really gorgeous. I think if you look closely at it, you can tell that she probably finished it from a photograph because it has that kind of flatness that people get when they copy. But it's really gorgeous, and you can see why she was so good and well respected in class and the envy of all the students, not only because she was voted most beautiful co-ed in 1965, but because she was really talented. And yes, Umlauf doted on her, according to the students. That's a Farrah Fawcett self-portrait. Her nephew, Greg Walls, has that in his collection, and it's really gorgeous. So it's oil on canvas, probably early 70s. And another Farrah Fawcett looking very much like Umlauf, and this is in 1971. I don't have them here, but there are some Umlaufs that are very similar, and it's obviously a Madonna and Child. Farrah was Catholic, and that's another part of the show that comes out, her Catholicism. And then some other things that we have archivally. We don't have these in our collection, but these were lent to me by her nephew. We have a lot. She would visit. After she left, she dropped out of UT in 1968 after her junior year because the pull to Hollywood was just too strong. She immediately started getting parts there. But very early on, even in late 68, 69, and 70, and then she's in Myra Breckenridge, and she complains about the cat fighting on the set, and she's writing letters to Mr. Umlauf. And then, this is from 1971, she would come back every time she was in Austin, she would come back to visit, and she would always talk about him as her favorite professor. And so there they are with the kiss. And this is all up at the Umlauf house. This is before there was an Umlauf garden, so these things were up at the house. And there she is when Pietà, you saw the studio earlier, Pietà used to be up at the Umlauf house. And there she is again. It's just so lovely and so young. And then I thought because I happen to have them handy, show just a couple of images from going through storage at the Blanton. So this is one of the portraits of Redmond O'Neill that we borrowed. That's actually painted terracotta. It looks like bronze, but it's dark. And this is another poignant part of the show to me, and I am hoping you'll come see it because I think there's a lot of value in this show for many reasons. But Umlauf had a lot of hope for children, and children are often very symbolic as the promise for the future in Umlauf's work. And so you can feel that he's doing that when he makes these portraits of Redmond. Well, Redmond has not turned out well. He's had a really tough, drug-addicted life, and has been in prison and rehab more than half his life. And so it's sad. He's 32 now. But to see these portraits that are, a baby still in the making. And then on the bottom, these are some photographs from when we were touring through the Blanton. You've seen this one already, but this is kind of neat. Farrah had a copy of Umlauf's Reclining Muse, which is interesting because a version of that was the second winner for the Love Field competition. Remember, that was anonymous. But this is a little scale model, and I want to call your attention to this. A lot of them are signed on the bottom. And so this one says, "To Farrah with love, Charles Umlauf." And, and she actually used it, and so it got sticky and got worn away. And then there's another one. This is a drawing we didn't show from Umlauf, but it says, "Farrah with all my love, Charles Umlauf." So there's all kinds of, as far as I know, the relationship was platonic. I'm sure he would have loved to have it otherwise, but it was a very warm relationship. And it's neat that she kept this, and when she had this drawing reframed, she cut that out and had it stuck on the back of it. And this made me think of what Atlee was saying yesterday. There's another place where she took out an article about Andy Warhol and actually stuck it to the back of her painting. So she was always thinking about, the importance of these things, and on a personal and on a broader level. So we're getting close to the end, but Umlauf was awarded Texas Artist of the Year in Houston in 1985, and there he is very happily with Farrah. She and Ryan O'Neal both came to that, and I heard Ryan was just a real nightmare. And Angie wasn't very happy either, but it was Texas State Artist from the Houston Art League in 1985, a really big deal. But I wanted to bring that up because it was Ryan O'Neal who introduced Farrah Fawcett to Andy Warhol, and that is a whole. She has this Umlauf traditional Renaissance style. She even calls one of her sculptures Renaissance. And then she has this whole other side of her, and I'm sorry, a lot of the Farrah stuff got lost in the slide glitches. But Warhol drew on 3 napkins when he was out to dinner with her in Houston, and her friend Sylvia Longoria Dorsey, who owns the Longoria collection in Houston, is a designer, and she had them reframed, so they're folded up napkins. And Sylvia tells a wonderful story that she was out at Farrah's house in Bel Air and going through all her stuff, and she found these crumpled up napkins, and she said, "Oh my gosh, these are Andy Warhol's, you need to keep these." And Farrah said, "Oh, but they have soup stains on them." And indeed they do. So Sylvia is the one who's responsible for having them framed, and there were in fact 3. You may have heard there was a huge lawsuit because Ryan O'Neal wanted one of the Warhol silk screens of Farrah, and he did win it. The Blanton got one, and Ryan O'Neal got the other. Ryan O'Neal also got the second napkin that had his name on it in as part of that lawsuit as well. But this one we were able to borrow, and I was very happy that the insurance values are low because it has not been authenticated. And we have 2 other Warhols in there as well. This is the Warhol that was the cause of the lawsuit. And there's kind of a funny story behind this because it was 2 portraits of Farrah Fawcett based on an Andy Warhol Polaroid in 1980. And so the Blanton got one with the collection, and then they found out that Ryan O'Neal had the other one at his beach house. Farrah and Ryan always had separate houses, but he had it at his beach house in Malibu. So the Blanton sued, it ends up going to jury trial, and Ryan O'Neal won. But the funny thing is, both of those had been lent to an exhibition in 2001 at the Warhol Museum, and Ryan O'Neal's and Farrah's actually got flip-flopped, and so the one that Blanton has is actually Ryan's, and the one that Ryan was is, and I just found that out from the artist Keith Edmeyer, and so it's just this entertaining coda to this horrible, horrible lawsuit and drama. And then part of the point of the show is just to show this long-time friendship. And so that's Farrah's mother. And she would actually come to the Umlauf studio when Farrah was in LA and bring her friends, because she really liked knowing this famous artist. And so you can see them working on this. And I actually think that's Farrah made that day. But we have a bunch of darling little photographs like that. And you can see how extremely happy old Professor Umlauf is there. And then even after he passed, she was there in 1994, right before he passed, and then she came to the Umlauf 5 times since he passed, and would see the old director, former director, Nayli Plord. And these are photographs from some of her later visits that we have. And so, in short, the show is really fun for a lot of reasons. I think primarily because of course, it's a lesson on thinking that we know somebody and not really knowing somebody. But I think the real depth of it is learning what a sensitive eye and thoughtful artist Farrah was. And you see this incredible depth to her. And that is also paralleled in some of the roles that she took. She shunned Hollywood sometimes and would take roles in shows like The Burning Bed or Extremities, about a defiant woman or a battered woman. And I thought that was interesting that she chose these very emotionally wrenching roles as well as having that interest in her art. And that's it. Thank you so much for letting me pinch hit.